Trump gets blocked on Twitter, certain tweets, as well as fact-checked by the social media site. Today we're going to discuss Trump's reaction, his executive order he signed against Twitter. What does this mean for social media in the future? Today on the Tonic Accord podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Tonic Accord. My name is Drew. I'm joined by my friend and co-host Alex, as usual. And how you doing, Alex, by the way?
Doing pretty well, man. I've got about a week left in Spain, and then I am back to California for the foreseeable future, studying and looking into master's programs. So, yeah.
That's fantastic, dude. I'm just hanging out in quarantine, trying to stay safe, trying to stay sane. And just kind of following the news. Obviously, this last week, the dominating news story has been the reaction to George Floyd's death and the protests resulting in that. There's definitely a discussion to be had about that topic. We do want to cover that eventually on the Tonic Accord, but we also wanted to make sure that we get a variety of voices and to handle it, in a tactful way. So do stay tuned for that. But for now, we wanted to cover some of the other topics that maybe aren't so much on the headline news. This one's a little bit related, but it deals with Trump and Twitter, right? This is, almost peanut butter and jelly for the last 4 years. Trump has basically utilized Twitter as the main way to communicate with the American people as a candidate and officially as the president using his Twitter account. But recently, Trump made a claim about mail-in voting that Twitter then labeled as potentially misleading, and it had a link to, informing yourself on mail-in voting. Trump's reaction was then to declare that Twitter was influencing the 2020 election and going against free speech. And then as well as that, Trump made a tweet saying something along the lines of, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Twitter then blocked that tweet on his account as glorifying violence. The tweet was then retweeted by the official White House account, which then Twitter also blocked, saying that it was glorifying violence. This has led Trump to respond with an executive order he signed targeting social media sites and companies, claiming that they are attacking free speech. There's a couple more specific details and legal battles that we'll talk about, but essentially it's Trump's big Twitter beef, and his Twitter beef is with Twitter. So what are your initial reactions to this kind of Twitter beef, Alex?
Well, I think peanut butter and jelly was a good description there off the beginning. It's true. And this is kind of a question to everyone and to the viewers. There doesn't really need to be an answer to this, but it's just my thoughts is why now, I guess, with flagging Trump, why now? And it kind of expresses I'm actually concerned about what Twitter's doing to not a large extent, but to a little bit of an extent, mainly just because I think that they are kind of adding this kind of gray confusion to what social media companies are and what they're supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. Because the CDA, as you mentioned earlier, which is the Communications Decency Act, it was kind of instrumental in creating the internet the way we have it right now, right? Because before then, you basically had two forms of media companies: those that were liable for the information they put out, like the New York Times, and then those that claimed no responsibility, like phone callers, telemarketing, things like that, where there's a complete just disconnect. And basically the CDA, which was Section 230, kind of muddled this and combined this to a point where social media companies and tech companies are not liable for the information that is put out on their platforms. And it's kind of create this almost third status for these companies that is confusing, it's muddled, but it's also kind of created the atmosphere which we have with. And I'm worried that there could be positives to this because, as I think both of us could agree, Trump says a lot of crazy BS. He's done it as a private citizen. He's done it as president. And clearly a lot of it is not true. Most of it, I would even say, is not true. But the problem is that I think by now flagging these, it's going to get a rise out of both sides. First off, his base is now going to have even less trust in the government and in these private companies. They're going to call the media even more fake. And it's probably going to glorify Trump to a certain extent. And then I think also on the left, it could also be weaponized to a certain extent. And I'm just a little bit worried that during a very divided election cycle, Twitter now is slowly becoming more and more third party in the ring.
Yeah, I mean that is an interesting point. It's like why now, right? Why is Twitter like a lot of claims without evidence have been made on Twitter. I mean, anyone can see that, right? Now we're certainly not. It's not a new thing that people say crazy stuff on Twitter all over the board. So it is interesting that it's why now. But I still have to think that Twitter is not the government, right? Twitter is a private business that can decide what they do with their platform, and that's there's legal precedence for that. First off, let's get into the first tweet that sparked this was the tweet that Trump claimed without evidence that mail-in ballots were fraudulent. Again, there's not much evidence that we know of currently to support that claim. In fact, many of the Trump's own administration use mail-in ballots. So, it is potentially misleading, right? But I think maybe this, like, Twitter is trying to make a change in their policies, and flagging one of Trump's tweets is the biggest way to let everyone know that there's a big change coming. And, I think that, like, we had a conversation on this podcast before about deplatforming and, our social media sites, the new public forum, and need to be treated as such. And there are very good arguments on both sides about that. But if we look at the actual legal precedents, it's what you said. It's that bill from 1996 that says, social media sites and websites are not liable for all the content that's put out. You know what I mean? It's not like a news station on cable that is, it is more like, it's an open forum where people can say crazy, ridiculous things, and that doesn't mean that the website is liable, right? Verizon, like you said about phone companies, Verizon is not liable for all the crazy things people say on their phones, and it'd be ridiculous to then extend that to Verizon or T-Mobile or whatever. In the same vein as these internet sites, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook's not liable for all the crazy things that people say. Now there is a limit to this, right? It's not a complete anarchy. Websites are liable and I think are required to get rid of things like child pornography, things that promote sex trafficking. Like there is definitely a limit, right? The government has decided you can't just let complete anarchy, like you can't just let absolutely illegal activity just go on your site untouched. And that's fair. But as far as speech is concerned, companies are not liable for what's said on their things, but the counter to that is they are also free to censor or get rid of or manage what is said on their sites as they see fit, and that is the current law. And I think that's why Trump has now had this executive order to try and start the process to curtail that in his mind.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point, And from what I've been seeing all over the internet too, it does seem like Twitter for a long time has been very divided on this issue. Mm-hmm. It sounds like there were reports that about half of Twitter's executives were basically telling Dorsey, don't flag this, and the other half were like, yes, we need to flag this. And I mean, I think for a long time Twitter's been struggling with identity. They're really trying to bounce back and forth on which line do they want to be, because if they limit too much speech as a private company, then how much different are they than the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal? But if they allow too much, then what could they incite with it? And it's this really slippery slope that clearly, as we've seen, is only escalated. Now my issue is I know they're a private company. I know. But the problem is that as we've seen everything from politics to sports to social lives, this is the public forum, like it or not. This is something that, for work you need, for politics, just every aspect of life involving especially publication and PR and everything. And the problem is that if you start limiting people from this, then I feel like you are in some ways taking their their rights and their First Amendment abilities away from them, if you like it or not. And I was interested because for years there's been a lot of voices on the right saying that there's a conservative bias, right? And I take that with a grain of salt, because part of me thinks that there is a bit of a bias, but also I think that some of the claims that have been made by some of these conservatives who have been banned are much more controversial than maybe the equivalent on the left. You have people like Alex Jones, for example, who was basically calling fire in a crowded movie theater when he was telling people to harass the Sandy Hook families, right? And or the Pizzagate example, where he basically led people to believe that there's a sex ring in a pizza shop, and that led to violence, and I think that's why, as you think of these extreme examples, and usually they're on the right, because there are some very controversial ideas that go on, and you do need to limit some of their speech. But that being said, it was interesting because on the same day as Trump took to Twitter and then did this executive order, there was actually a ruling in a U.S. appeals court in D.C. that dismissed a lawsuit that was about conservative bias. And the ruling judge basically found that it was a conservative think tank that had sued, claiming that there's conservative bias. And the judges said that they failed to actually come up with a claim that there were state actors involved with this. And they were quoted saying the companies cannot violate the First Amendment because banning users doesn't constitute government abridgment of free speech.
Right.
And I don't like that, though, because I think there's a broader discussion to be had about banning and free speech. Because, like I said, though they're private companies, they in some ways have become a public good that is expressive of free speech. And so while they're defined legally as private companies, it's clear that they're not just that anymore.
Well, look, that's a good argument, and believe me, I take it to heart, because I do find that social media has become the new public forum. It's the new public square. One, though, is it's not like one is the physical public square where you can go out and say whatever you want. That's still around. That's not taken away. Free speech is based on the government's actions and not private companies. And my one argument I think is important is I think you would be absolutely right if Twitter was the end all be all dominant force in social media. But it's not. There's alternatives. There's Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg has even made it clear that he doesn't want Facebook to censor political speech or fact check, right? It's led to kind of a funny meme coming back that people say Mark Zuckerberg's dead because they're saying, oh, you can't fact check it, so he's dead. I'm just going to post it everywhere. Not exactly the most mature response, but a good laugh. But my argument, though, is that there are other options, right? There is a free market of social media sites that if you decide that Twitter doesn't treat your opinions fairly, you can go to somewhere else, like Facebook, that has decided that it won't censor or fact check political speech. So does Trump then make Facebook his main way of communicating with his audience? Again, it's this. There are alternatives, and there's nothing stopping anyone from making a website that doesn't censor at all. And in fact, there's been many attempts, actually. There's a famous instance where Reddit decided to quarantine a subreddit dedicated to the Donald Trump fan base. It's called The Donald. And a lot of those guys were saying, Reddit is censoring us. Reddit is right. And they didn't like Reddit, and they tried to move over to their own conservative based website. It got, minuscule amounts of traffic compared to what they had on Reddit. It frankly didn't work as a sustainable way to move sites, even though they tried. And it's because, Reddit was just a better site all around. So they're still on Reddit. They're not allowed to be on the front page because of inciting violence, but that's Reddit's own rules, and they have the option to leave. But they ended up coming back because, their alternative wasn't that good of a website. But nothing is stopping people from making their own alternatives. Nothing is stopping people from switching to another website. I would argue that if you had all the big players, right? Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, which is owned by Facebook. If they were all kind of censoring political speech and stuff, I think there's a stronger argument for, okay, we need to have some semblance of a through line of how do all these companies treat speech maybe the same way. But right now, it's Twitter's taken one route and Facebook has taken another route, and you can decide between the two.
That's a very good point, and I think it is something that is important to note for that effect, is because it's almost like you have two alternative experiments going on with social media, right? You have Twitter, which is kind of realizing maybe we do need to start checking some things here. Check yourself before you wreck yourself on Twitter.
Right.
And then you do have Facebook that clearly is kind of almost permitting and kind of flourishing with this Wild West type of vibe. And that is a good point. Like, I mean, and I would argue both have their downfalls for sure. I mean, you know, Facebook has kind of allowed this misinformation to completely flourish as well. And my issue, though, is that Twitter is almost more of a direct communication, where Facebook, just the whole apparatus around it isn't the same. Like, you have to actually be in friend groups. You have to be accepted into groups. You have to be. It's supposed to be more personal.
Right.
I guess is what I'm trying to say. And where Twitter is kind of, you can spew off on anything and a lot of people can see it. It's kind of like Instagram unless you go private, you know. And just my issue is, because I think it's a valuable point you bring up, is that you can go somewhere else. But my issue is that when you start dividing up the people that actually want to use Twitter and allow them to go to somewhere else, you can get some pretty dark things out of that too. Because if you take all the loonies and don't allow them on Twitter, and I know I used this when we had Grayson on, we did the platforming episode, I used this argument, but I do think it's important, is that when you take all the loonies out of the public eye and put them into the dark corners, it's just going to make things worse. And I just don't know if, like, in a very just symbolic sense, I like that Twitter is now the gatekeeper for what is the correct discourse.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with that claim about putting things in a dark corner makes it worse, because take, for example, Alex Jones inciting violence against Sandy Hook victims, promoting the Pizzagate conspiracy that led to someone bringing an assault rifle to that pizza shop. He was then, you know, his YouTube channel was removed. He was banned off of, I think, Twitter. You know, he was deplatformed. The definition of deplatformed. Now you have to go directly to his website to watch his live streams and buy his BS masculinity pills or whatever. And I would argue he's less dangerous now. He's inciting less violence now. He has less of an influence on people that are more, you know, conspiracy influenced and maybe more radical. I would argue that it worked against Alex Jones. I don't see him as a more prominent figure now that he's been removed off of these private companies for inciting violence. I would argue, my argument is that Alex Jones was put into the dark corner, and that has actually been beneficial for the public.
Yes and no. Like, I think on Alex Jones, 100% correct, because I think it was the public image and the sponsorships and kind of, I mean, he's down to the most basic sense, he's just a crazy conspiracy theorist, you know? I mean,
well, he's a snake oil salesman at the end of the day.
Oh, completely. And so I think there's something different about someone like that who almost flourishes kind of the spotlight. As to someone, when I more mean that when you put some of the fringes into a dark corner, I mean the guy who's, you know, maybe the incel type of person who's angry at the world and, you know, maybe is kicked out of one platform and then falls into something like Gab, where there's a lot of neo-Nazi alt-right ideas, and there's no one there maybe saying, hey man, you're crazy, like, or reporting what you're saying, or, you know, I mean, if you post something really bad on Twitter, the backlash is going to be much stronger than if you post something on something like Gab and it's only seen by people who also agree with what you're saying. And to me, that's just the point, is that discourse, not always, but I would say most of the time, is important for either condemning bad ideas or allowing sometimes better ideas to.
Okay. Yes, I agree with that statement for sure. I do think that discourse is important. And again, I'm not arguing for, you know, censoring opinions that differ from whatever the status quo or the majority or whatever. I'm saying, you know, Twitter did not block Trump for being like, we don't agree with this. It was, no, right. This is factually misleading. Or the one about, you know, when the looting starts, the shooting starts, which, by the way, is a dog whistle reference to a cop in Miami in the 1960s that was notorious for police brutality against black people, right? A pretty obvious dog whistle inciting violence. Like those are the things that they're blocking him for. They're not blocking him for being, you know, Sleepy Joe or you know, stupid Nancy Pelosi. They're blocking him for inciting violence. And that, I think that's where the conversation needs to be, is, you know, we're not talking about differing opinions. We're talking about lying to people with misleading facts. You know, again, potentially, right? Twitter said it's potentially misleading. and also, inciting violence. Again, inciting violence from someone who has power to do so, which is the president of the United States.
Yeah, completely. And kind of going back to Trump, I agree with you on the second one. When the looting starts, the shooting starts, because clearly there's a historical context, and there are going to be people that see that and say, okay, well, so the president seems to at least maybe not condone it, but he's sure putting that idea out there, and I think that is dangerous. Like for me, it's just interesting that it wasn't something like that spewed it. It was more the fact about these false claims on mail voting.
Right.
Just because he has been saying very similar stuff for years. I mean, he blamed election fraud when Hillary won the popular vote.
Yeah.
He's blamed, it's just, I bet you and I could sit and do like a 3-hour podcast and just look through the amount of conspiracies and false claims he's made. And that's why I'm surprised that they drew the line on that, because as I recall, Trump took off the tweet saying when the looting starts, the shooting starts, and then clarified that he wasn't inciting violence, and then it was okay. So to me, it's just interesting where this line has, and I think part of it is because Twitter is trying to figure out what they want to do. I don't know if they really know what they're trying to accomplish here, though they know that they're trying to curb this somehow. But it's just so convoluted that I could just see a lot of people, especially Trump supporters, go, "Well, this is just a conspiracy."
Well, certainly, but I would argue that a lot of Trump supporters see anything as a conspiracy. I mean. I think we need to start diving into the actual legal precedents for this kind of stuff. Part of that. So one of the things that Trump tweeted in response to Twitter doing all these actions was revoke 230. So what is that? So 230 is the Section 230 of that Communications Decency Act we talked about in 1996. This particular section is the section that says online platforms are not legally responsible for what users post. And there's actually criticism from both the left and the right about this. Republicans, including Trump, accuse social media sites of what we've said, muzzling conservative voices, having a political bias. They say undoing Section 230 would let people who claim they have been slighted sue the companies, right? That would open the door for lawsuits against censorship if you get rid of Section 230. Now, on the other side of the aisle, Democratic skeptics of the law, one of which is Nancy Pelosi, by the way, they say that Section 230 has created an environment that allows for the rampant spread of online misinformation, harassment, and abuse, right? So they argue that Section 230 has allowed people like Mark Zuckerberg to be like, whatever, we know that there's misinformation going on. I mean, one of the biggest examples was a huge misinformation campaign in Myanmar using Facebook that Zuckerberg was criticized for. And doesn't do anything about, right? And Zuckerberg is allowed to do that under Section 230. So it's interesting that there's on both sides there's an argument against this kind of legal protection for these social media sites to either take no stance, right, to have no involvement in what is said on their site, or to take an involvement on what they see fit on their private site, right? They're protected by Section 230. So it's interesting that, on both sides, there's this concern. And, some people have said maybe there will be this even Joe Biden says Section 230 should be scrapped for fear of spread of fake news. So it's this weird, double sword where you may even have this bipartisan resolution to get rid of the Section 230, but for very different reasons.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, I'm surprised Biden is very aware of social media, to be honest. Right, that's a whole other.
I'm surprised he knows how to log into Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah, he's not using the Telegram. But anyways, I think it is interesting, and what it shows me a little bit is that big tech is like big oil, but it's moving at such an unprecedented rate of growth that no one knows really quite how to curb it. I mean, you said it was in '96 when they passed this, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, think about how much has changed since '96. Do you think anyone could have visualized a YouTube or a Twitter or a Facebook or a Tinder?
No.
And that's the problem is I think that's the biggest solution that policymakers face is now people, especially the generation under us, especially, are accustomed to this in their day-to-day life, and most people are kind of relying on this system that has kind of sprung out of nowhere. And so it's there's a lot of issues. There's a lot of kinks, but it's going to be extremely difficult now to go back on that. And I'm with you, man. Like I think there's a lot of things that need to be changed, especially, this is just my opinion, but I actually applaud Twitter in some ways where I don't applaud Facebook, mainly because I think Facebook and kind of what's happened under Zuckerberg is that the cat's kind of got out of the bag, and now he's kind of there for self-survival, where I think that Jack Dorsey and the others at Twitter do almost have this altruistic view of creating like a global discussion. And when you listen to Jack Dorsey talk about this, he hopes that one day Twitter could almost bridge the gap in language, that it could be the beginning of something close to a universal language. And when you hear him talk and you hear Zuckerberg, what I hear is Dorsey's, when he's not at his yoga retreats or his meditation class, there's something to him that does want to see this company almost do good, but along the way there's going to be a lot of road bumps. Where I'm concerned that Facebook has just pretty much found gold, and they've tapped it, and now they almost it's out of the control, and now they're just in self-survival. And 230 is fascinating to me, but my big issue is that the irony of this whole thing is that Trump wants 230 to be investigated and reformed, but if they do that, Trump's whole presidency probably wouldn't exist, because 230 is what's completely protected Trump and all these other controversial people. And so it's almost like 230 is this weird asterisk to this whole thing, where without it, where would we be?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that idea that 230 opens up the door to lawsuits, right? So yeah, maybe Trump can then sue Twitter, but guess what, man? I bet you a lot of people could start suing you for the things you say on Twitter, right? It opens, I think getting rid of 230 opens up a door that we don't want to open. I think maybe there's an argument for a replacement, but it is true. I mean, like experts have said that 230 is the reason our internet is the way it is. It is the reason that websites like Facebook and Twitter and Reddit have flourished, for better or worse. But without Section 230, some experts argue sites would have less tolerance for people posting their opinions. You might have more censorship without 230. And then without I don't know. It's this weird thing where it's like you open up this door that I don't think Trump realizes could come back to bite him.
It would definitely come back to bite him. I mean, I would say his new resurgence of his political career was by, the hoax that Obama wasn't born in the United States, right?
Right.
Just imagine if 230 didn't exist.
Yeah, he could have gotten sued for that.
Oh, completely. Imagine the defamation and just the content that Trump would not be able to get away with, and probably for the better in a lot of ways, because, I mean, we live in such a strange time where I find myself double-checking everything I read because I don't know what's true or false anymore. Like, on both sides, I don't, and it's probably all led because of this, but how do you – it's the Pandoras Box. I know it's a cliche way to put it, but it is. It's the Pandoras Box.
What?
We've opened it, and it's out.
Right, and think about that. Think about that birther thing too. Is not only would Trump then be liable, but then also the website he posted that conspiracy theory. Because again, Section 230 is these sites are not liable or responsible for what people post on their website to a degree. Again, we've talked about some of the extreme limitations, but so if someone says something like defamation on your site, Twitter itself doesn't want to get sued, because if you get rid of 230, then that means, hey, Twitter, you are responsible for what people say. That would only then lead to Twitter censoring things they see as a liability, right? So you think getting rid of Section 230 would allow for more free speech, and in actuality, I think it would have the opposite effect. It would then mean these companies are like, man, if we're responsible for what people say on our websites, then of course we're going to censor all the crazy crap that people say, because we don't want to be legally liable for that. We don't want to be liable for defamation or slander or inciting violence because you got rid of Section 230. So it's almost this, it's almost this like, biting the hand that feeds you in a way.
Oh, completely. Yeah. It's just like it would be, I personally think it's one of those things that it would be impossible. It's very possible to evolve and go forward, but it would be almost impossible to go back. And that's why you have to think kind of in the future, in the big picture. what could policymakers, do to instead not get rid of this, but to evolve it? Because that's where, I never agreed too much with Elizabeth Warren. I thought I didn't like anything really about her candidacy, but I guess the one thing I did like was her discussion on do need to maybe break up some of
break up the
and
tech
maybe
companies.
look at them like yeah, because we did the same with, throughout American history. This has been most recently, I would say, with Standard Oil, the late 1800s, early 1900s, and I just think that because we're having such a nuanced but complicated conversation about this, I don't think what's happening now is going to work forever. And I know that the right would freak out and say, well, Mark Zuckerberg's a liberal, and Jack Dorsey goes to yoga retreats, so there's probably a bias. But these guys are liberals on a day-to-day basis in what they believe at home couch, but they're capitalists, man. At the end of the day, these are capitalists here, and I don't particularly think that if we all of a sudden gave these companies more of a public value, I don't think they would all of a sudden just be, limiting conservatives left and right. I don't think that would happen, but I do think we need to maybe consider, is Twitter something that needs to be either broken up or publicized?
Yeah, well, that's definitely we could go a whole other episode on that, right? Especially in regards to like Amazon, right? Some of these tech companies, that are now becoming these octopuses of industries, right? Similar to the Gilded Age, where you had, companies absorbing other companies so that they had a start to finish through line of ownership. Amazon's becoming like that. Facebook, as far as social media, Facebook's becoming like that a little bit as well, right? Facebook owns Instagram. Quick side note, it's so funny when I remember there was this whole movement to get off Facebook when Zuckerberg was getting criticized. And I saw all these people posting to get off Facebook on Instagram. And I was like, you guys realize that they own this, right? But so, yeah, that definitely is a conversation that I think we could go deeper into maybe some other time is, do we maybe break up some of these tech companies? Because you're right, they're getting huge. And there's definitely a conversation to be had of maybe they have too much influence on public life. But with that said, that should wrap up today's episode. What do you think out there? Do you think Twitter made the right call by flagging some of these tweets as potentially misleading? Do you think that they made the wrong call and should stay off and not put their hand into the discussion and go back to what they did before, which was let Trump tweet what he wants? Definitely a lot of good arguments on both sides. It's not a black and white clear cut issue. Again, we said Section 230 has criticism from both sides of the aisle. So we are very interested in hear what you think. Let us know your comments and thoughts. And as always, stay tuned for more episodes. Thank you for listening.